the feeling of when you learn through entrepreneurship that you can always change your mind. You can always pivot, right? It's fail fast, fail forward. But I think to learn that at a young age is really important because it does knock some of that fear out of you as like I have my entire life left. If this stops being fun, I can just stop. If I don't like the country I'm in, I can just leave. And I don't know why that's so hard as young people to wrap our minds around that we don't have to make commitments right now for the rest of our lives. You can commit to something now and still change your mind. But I think the course of entrepreneurial leadership really encourages you to pick something, pursue it, and if you don't like it or it's not working, change something.
Hello and welcome to the Clarity Compass. My name is Greg Woodman and I'm delighted for our guest today. Her name is Jess Strait. And a little background, she was a student in my class, Entrepreneurial Leadership, in fall of 2019 and one of the brightest students I've ever had. So I selected her to be my learning assistant for 2 years. In our curriculum, we have our students write personal life plans. And so we've been 3 years together on helping students navigate their personal life plan and finding their North Star. So I'm particularly delighted to have Jess. Jess, welcome to the Clarity Compass.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm excited to tell the audience who you are and a little bit about your background and the adventures you've been on since you graduated here from Penn State University.
Sure. So I'm originally from Southern Virginia. That's where I grew up. But I am a fourth generation Penn Stater. So my dad went here, my grandfather, and my great-grandfather. So I think I was coming to Penn State whether I liked it or not. But I came to Penn State, studied data science. After graduation, went into the nonprofit thing, and I'm still in a nonprofit career track, not doing data science in any way, shape, form, or fashion, but doing a lot of fun and other impactful things. And for the last 2 years, I have been traveling full-time as a digital nomad, working completely remotely.
Well, that's a lot to unpack.
It's a lot to unpack.
But we'll try to unpack a lot of that in the next hour. So digital nomad, that's one topic. And you said you made a decision to go the nonprofit route. And now here you graduated what year?
2022.
And data science, hottest field, it's the birth of artificial intelligence. You're a rock star. Interviewed on campus. I recall you had multiple job offers. And tell us a little bit about choosing not to go into a six-figure income job right out of Penn State University, and you rode less traveled. You chose a nonprofit. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well,
or a lot about it.
Greg, of course, you were there and coached me through pretty much the entire process. But no, I studied data science. I was very much a programmer, very much a statistician. And I had intended to take a career path that would let me down that way, to the point I'd actually accepted one of those job offers I had received from a major corporation to go and make the big artificial intelligence money at a big corporation. And I think I held that job offer for about 4 months before I started to get cold feet that maybe it wasn't exactly what I was supposed to be doing. The entire time I had been at Penn State, I'd been a student volunteer with a nonprofit I currently work at. We do washable pads and menstrual hygiene education called Days for Girls. Love my job very much. But I'd been doing it as a student volunteer, just totally separate from curriculum, kind of as my main extracurricular on campus. And when it came time to graduate, I just felt like I had not spent all of the time I was supposed to spend with that mission. I'd ended up doing my thesis related to menstrual health. I'd done all of this volunteer work. And when I was thinking about what I was going to spend the next, let's say, 5 years of my life doing, going to build AI for big oil did not feel like the thing I was supposed to be doing. And so I'd gotten cold feet. I kind of started looking around like, oh gosh, what do I do? I've already accepted this job. I was ready to move to the city I needed to move to, down in Houston, Texas, which would have been a big lifestyle change. And the organization, Days for Girls, had just happened to post an IT manager position, which as a data science major was the only thing I was even remotely qualified to do for them. Interviewed for the job, got offered the job immediately after the interview. And I remember calling you up, Greg, and I was like, what do I do? This would be a big change, not necessarily the income level I'd planned for when I chose data science as a degree, and not really the field I've been studying for the last 4 years. But it felt like the right thing to do, kind of took the leap of faith. Honestly, at the time, the remote work thing wasn't even what sold me on it. It was just feeling like I had not done everything I needed to do for that mission yet.
So you called up the big oil company and you were going to be moving to Texas.
I was.
And you said, I've changed my mind.
I was very honest with them. I told them I had an opportunity come up to work in the nonprofit space, and I feel like it's what I'm meant to be doing right now. They didn't do anything wrong, right? They offered everything you would possibly want in a job as an immediate college graduate. It just wasn't the right time.
And so as you alluded to, it was before COVID, but you liked the offer that was remote work.
This was a post-COVID world. So remote work had gotten more popular.
Okay. So got it. Okay. And so when did you decide to go completely remote in a sense of a digital nomad, which is another new word that came about, I think, because of COVID? It was the popularity of digital nomad.
I think it changed with the rise of remote work being more of a standard during COVID, but also just the ability to freelance digitally, I think, has made it more popular. But the term digital nomad generally refers to someone that travels full-time, not for work, and is working completely remotely the entire time.
Where have you traveled in this digital nomad world? How long have you been doing it? And I'm excited to hear about the adventures around the world that you've stumbled upon.
Sure. So when I started with Days for Girls, I still had a home base. I was living in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I lived there for about a year and a half. I had kind of touched the nomad thing. I had done maybe 2-week trip, 3-week trip, but I always had somewhere to come back to. I was still paying rent. I still had a car, all of the things you need to live in the US. And it was almost exactly 2 years ago, Thanksgiving 2023 was the point where I felt it was time to take the leap into doing what I had thought I would do when I heard it was a remote job, right? I was like, oh, I can travel, like what an incredible opportunity. And I felt that I hadn't been doing it to the extent I should be for the other sacrifices I'd made to take that job. And so I started full-time nomading, maybe not in a way I would recommend, but what is probably the most economical way for anybody to do it, which is absolutely jump in with 2 feet, clean break from pretty much everything. So sold my car, broke my lease, ended my relationship, and I was like, all right, no going back. I'm doing it now, whether I wanted to or not. And then at the beginning of 2024, I had a one-way ticket to Thailand and spent the next 8 months in Asia. And I did that completely the wrong way. I would never recommend anybody doing this. But at the time, I thought, I'm going to take this trip. I'll come back. Maybe this is the only time in my life I'm ever going to do it, right? In my head, I was already thinking, I'll come back and get a new apartment, maybe pick a new city, do what else I need to do. It was meant to be a 3-month trip. As I said, it was an 8-month trip. So much longer than I had anticipated. But it felt good. I mean, it worked great. I traveled way too fast. I hit 10 countries in 8 months, which was insane. And I don't recommend it to anybody. But I think it made me really fall in love with the idea of being independent in that space. One phrase I really like with reference to full-time traveling is wherever you go, there you are. You have to be really comfortable with yourself and your own company to be functionally entirely alone for 8 straight months.
Wow. But you met people along the way.
I met people along the way. This year, 2025, I have traveled much smarter in a way I would recommend to others, which is slowing down a lot. Now I'm at about one city every 4 to 6 weeks. So I have slowed down tremendously, but that does allow you to then build stronger relationships. I've lived in some co-livings, which are kind of like dorms for people that work remotely, where everyone comes and lives for a month or two. And it's given me more of a sense of community that I didn't have the first year when I was literally just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what stuck.
And kind of taking a counterintuitive path, the road less traveled, on first accepting the nonprofit position and turning down double the salary, pretty much, and then leaping to this digital nomad life while still serving your nonprofit, I'm sure better than ever. So your quality of work has not lessened. Could you say it almost has been enhanced because you've traveled the globe?
Absolutely. And the type of work I'm interested in doing has changed. So I started with Days for Girls only doing IT, very technical operations focused work, which is what I was trained to do at Penn State, right? And things I was able to learn on the job. I consider myself a professional problem solver before anything, which bodes very well for someone in IT. But I added a little bit of time in advocacy as I was helping with the project, and then added more and more time. And now I'm full-time in a programmatic role in the advocacy department, which is totally not what I studied, totally not what I expected to do when I chose a data science degree. But I think it's a better fit for where I am right now that I have a little bit more of this global perspective and kind of see where our mission fits into this bigger picture of the world.
And how have you dealt with, friends and family and colleagues just challenging how unusual your path has been?
I would say the biggest challenger I've gotten is probably my grandmother, who refers to me as voluntarily homeless, which is not technically incorrect. But for the most part, people have been very supportive. I do think it is tremendously more difficult to maintain relationships when you don't have a static location. My true close friends, they're the people who I'm continuously going to travel or they're coming to meet me somewhere. But that takes time and money and effort. And those have to be people that you're really willing to put in the effort for, that are also willing to put in the effort for you to maintain that relationship. But the flip side of that is then I've built this incredibly global network that I never would have had if I'd stayed in Raleigh or State College or somewhere in the US, of other people that live like me, that are traveling full time, or that have traveled for extended periods of time, taking career breaks. And it's the type of people you meet in that environment are just a really special type of people that I've been fortunate to connect with.
So there's a tribe and a community that you guys are connected, the digital nomads of the world unite type of thing. Is there an affinity group? Is there a website platform?
There are plenty of platforms. It's certainly not a we all know each other. There's just too many people. But there is what we call the co-living circuit, right?
Oh.
So co-livings are like these big houses, which are all people that work remotely are coming and living in these big houses. Maybe, let's say 20 or 30 people, depending on the size of the facility. And you live there together in that space for a month, and you're doing things together and you're experiencing the new city. And no, you're not always with the same people, of course, but there's only so many co-livings in the world, right? The people that I met in Oaxaca, Mexico were the same people I was staying with in Burgos, Bulgaria, because we're just people that live this kind of lifestyle.
So as you rattle off more places where you have set up port, and I don't know what the word is, but where you've kind of been in the last, how many years now? It's two.
Almost exactly 2.
2 years. Like rattle off all the countries you've been in.
Oh, that's way too long.
And this, we're talking 2 years, 24 months, and you're saying the list is too long, but rattle them off.
2 years, 24 months. Okay.
From memory, as best you can.
From memory, I started in Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. I think I'm missing a couple of the ones in Asia, but that's okay. Then this year I was in Oaxaca, Mexico, Guatemala, Chile, Bulgaria, and a little bit more time in the US this year than before.
Boy, I have so many questions. What was your favorite?
My favorite country, I normally go with Vietnam. I spent almost 2 months there, and I think I could have spent a whole lot more. It's got the mountains and the beach, incredible food, very affordable, especially on a nonprofit salary. Goes a lot further if you're living in Southeast Asia. And the people there were very welcoming to foreigners, which is not true in all of Asia.
Now, a big part of my first 10 years of my life was Vietnam. It was on the news every night.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was watching it, and having a lot of discussions around the table about it. You weren't alive then, and now you're on the sense of place. You're on the turf there. What was the tie to the 60s and the big battle of the Vietnam War and the controversies? And did you get a sense of history? Was there a lot of history there? What was your takeaway?
It's funny you say that, because my dad and I were just talking about this literally yesterday on the drive up to State College. So first of all, they call it the American War, not the Vietnam War, so that's different. But I did go to the War Remnants Museum, which was one of my favorite places I saw in Vietnam, just because it does make you realize how much, I'm not going to call it propaganda because it's not, but the way that we interpret events is so different from the way that they interpret events. And nobody is wrong, right? It's just what was aligned with our ethos, both at the time and in the present, of what was the right thing to do. But at the War Remnants Museum, the resolution of the war is very much considered the liberation of Vietnam from Western influence over their government, which is not how we learn it in the United States educational curriculum, right? But that's not a perspective I think I ever would have gotten if I hadn't gone and seen for myself the way that they talk about what our intervention, because the way that we describe it in the US is as if we were liberating them, but their feeling was that they were being encroached upon by Western values that weren't aligned with what they wanted for their own country. Whether this was right or wrong is neither here nor there. It's just how the two sides have interpreted it.
Oh, wow. And so, I do a lot of studying of sense of place and community. And I'm fascinated that there's a community from nomadic people who are not in the sense of place, but multiple places where they can still have the same affection and affinity for place, kind of? Or like, what's your take on that? Like this morning, I'm reading about a book about how city development and economic development and how sense of place is coming back with coffee shops and revitalization of any community USA. And now you're the antithesis of that, where there's no foundational sense of community, but there is a community, and the depth of the love for the community. Either way, I don't know what my question is here, but you are a subject matter expert, so I'm asking, like, what's it like as the antithesis to sense of place, of people who are rooted into their community, and then you're flipping the script on that whole thing. And are you desiring to get back into a rooted community based on your 2 years or not? Or this is the way to go?
Oh, I don't know that I could do what I'm doing forever. Whenever someone asks me, when are you going to stop? I always say when it stops being fun. So far, it's still fun. So there is not a date in the planner of when I'll stop, but I'm very much trusting the universe to take me where I need to be at this particular moment. I definitely would still say I experience place affinity. I mean, I've come back to State College, for a month at a time after graduation, just because it's a place where I feel comfortable. And I think there is a lot to say when you are constantly putting yourself in unfamiliar situations of discomfort. To come somewhere comfortable feels really, really good after the fact. I think the difference is not necessarily what you value, but what you prioritize. Because I absolutely still value the familiarity of coming back to State College. It feels great. After all of these months away, I'm just happy to be able to walk around and not check Google Maps, to know where I want to go eat because I know the good restaurants, because I know, that kind of thing. Because I never really get that when I'm only somewhere for a month. And I could stay longer. And some people do Nomad for 3-6 months at a time. And so maybe I'll get to that point where it's even slower. What I've found with a month is or a month to 6 weeks, maybe 2 months at the most, it's enough time to build a routine. After 3 weeks, I know where I like to go and do my work, a co-working space or something like that. I know where I like to get my coffee. I know the person that's making my coffee because I've seen them enough times. Maybe I have a yoga studio or a gym or some semblance of a routine that gives a little bit of place familiarity. The challenge with a month is as soon as you build that, you leave. And so it's constantly rebuilding that sense of familiarity in new environments. I think the difference is not that I don't value that, but at this moment, I'm prioritizing learning and experiencing new places over the familiarity. With anything in life, you're making a sacrifice. In this particular lifestyle, you are choosing to sacrifice the familiarity for the sake of novelty and new experiences. And maybe you don't do it forever, but it's what you're prioritizing for now.
Well, you mentioned earlier when you decided to go the nonprofit route, your risk, you said, was minimal because you were young. So how much is your youth, being in your 20s, tied to the ability to do this and putting a clock on when it might stop?
Wow. So I've met nomads at co-living spaces up to the age of about 38. I'm sure there are others who are older that are still doing it, but at least in the co-living circuit, we tend to fall between about ages 25 and 35. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think it's a point in your life where you will never have the same flexibility as you do right now, right? I have no dependence because of the way I choose to nomad with zero home base. I have basically no fixed expenses other than keeping myself alive and getting from place to place. So I think the level of flexibility you experience when you're young is unparalleled, which makes it certainly easier. And so when we talk about the things that you're willing to sacrifice to travel or live this kind of lifestyle, I have less to sacrifice now than I would if it was 15 years down the road and I had a family and dependence or were taking care of my parents or doing other things that right now I'm not obligated to.
Since we taught entrepreneurship and leadership together, how much is this what you're doing, design thinking? Is this entrepreneurship? You said you're a problem solver, you're an adventure seeker. Is this the seeds of this perhaps in the curriculum of teaching this? Does this make you more innovative? Is this exactly what we were teaching for the 3 years together?
So I'm not going to say I blame you for this, but to an extent, I kind of blame you for this because I think really leaning into the fail fast, fail forward mindset has pushed me to do things I would not have otherwise done. We talked a lot in the class that we did at Penn State and other projects we've worked on after about this fear versus love mentality. And I think being absolutely willing to stick it to fear was not something I had in me prior to fall 2019. Part of that perhaps is fully developing my frontal lobe. But I think a much more real part of that is the feeling of when you learn through entrepreneurship that you can always change your mind. You can always pivot, right? It's fail fast, fail forward. But I think to learn that at a young age is really important because it does knock some of that fear out of you as I have my entire life left. If this stops being fun, I can just stop. If I don't like the country I'm in, I can just leave. And I don't know why that's so hard as young people to wrap our minds around that we don't have to make commitments right now for the rest of our lives. You can commit to something now and still change your mind. But I think the course of entrepreneurial leadership really encourages you to pick something, pursue it, and if you don't like it or it's not working, change something. It is very focused on an internal locus of control, which for me was something that has resonated throughout the last 2 years, 5 years.
So everything's a minimal viable product.
Life is a minimum viable product.
You are a minimal viable product because of iterate. Iterate was the big key word. You can iterate, you can pivot, get customer feedback, stakeholder insights, and then you can change.
And we teach it in the context of a product or a business, but the whole thesis of the class that we taught, Greg, was that you yourself are a product you're taking to market every day, and you should be iterating on yourself as if you were a business idea going to market the same way you would if you were an iPhone. With every new update, you're changing things and making it better based on the feedback and based on how you're experiencing the product.
So why if, there was 33 students in our class, and then, we went through 2 years together with 33 each semester. Why does the curriculum somehow get to someone into your heart and other ones just cognitively, biasly say, this is crap? Like, what, how did it land with you to the extreme that it did? But that is the thesis, that you as a human being in that class treat yourself as a product and as a service, and you're here to serve the world versus, the world serving you. And yet you learn the toolbox of design thinking and the entrepreneurial mindset. You said fail fast, fail forward. But I'm really intrigued that even the slogan you just invented, stick it to fear. Should I come out with a line of apparel to that?
I would buy one.
But you just invented that. But like, and I remember you in class, your eyes were always darting when I was going through slides, and you had an intensity about you. Like, why you versus the person sitting next to you did you absorb and this get to you at the level that it did? Why?
I have a couple of thoughts. I think the first one, and you might not even remember this, is I have a very clear memory of, I don't remember if it was an assignment or maybe we were speaking, and you asked me what my motivator was for something I'd written in a homework. You asked me, what motivated you to choose this career? What motivates you to get up and come to class every day? And my answer at that time was fear. We had not unpacked the fear versus love thing. I was very much like, well, what do you mean? Why do I get up and come to class every day? Because if I don't, I'll have wasted all this money. I won't get a good job. I won't be able to do the things I want to do in the future. It was very much scarcity mentality, that if I don't do this work, I'm not going to be able to live the life that I want. But I think having to vocalize that to you was almost so embarrassing for me that I was like, how can that be the thing that's making me get out of bed every morning? How am I so not excited or not enthusiastic about my life that the thing motivating me is the fear of what will happen if I don't versus the desire and excitement to get up and do something? I think that was one big piece, was having to vocalize that and admit that to yourself is challenging, especially when you're young. I think the other piece, and you and I have discussed this a little bit, about what gets someone to the point where they're willing to stick it to fear. And I think where we landed is its confidence. And if you're a 19-year-old, it's hard to have the level of confidence required for that. But through the course curriculum that we set up, especially with the stakeholder audit, which is this assignment in which we sent out a survey to our teachers and parents and friends to see what they thought about us, I still have my results from that survey, because the things that people wrote about me were not the way I would have identified myself. And so the things especially that stuck out to me were people that were referring to me as a nurturing person. I would never have ever described myself that way at age 19. I was very analytical. I was a data scientist, and that's what I was going to be. And so to see the way that other people were seeing me, I think made me more reflective of the vibe I'm actually putting out into the world. And I think the last piece was seeing that everyone in my life identified me as that professional problem solver. And so when we talk about confidence to stick it to fear, it's not confidence that nothing's ever going to go wrong. It's not confidence that I am uniquely the most talented and wonderful person to walk the earth and, I can do whatever I want. But it is the confidence that if something goes wrong, I have the problem-solving ability to fix it myself. And that is the confidence that I think people need to develop to be willing to stick it to fear, is that if I'm going to fail fast, fail forward, when I do fail, I know how to pick myself back up.
And you learn from the failure.
Absolutely.
Failure equals learning. And that's another thing that's very difficult for people to absorb. They don't buy it. No, failure equals disaster. What do you mean I learn? And then, you reminded me of the class. We'd go through and put a list of times they have failed in their life. And it usually is what they've learned, the greatest leap of growth from that failure. Open new doors, or, fascinating. Back to confidence. My son, Nate Woodman, I'll do a shout out to him. He has to make a bunch of sales calls every day, works in the capital finance business, and he's getting people to invest in ideas and concepts. And he said he uses COTE. And I go, what the heck is COTE? He goes, COTE. And he goes, it's confidence, optimism, tenacity, and enthusiasm. When he's getting rejected, 20 times in a row, he's got to rechannel coat. And so I've been using it this week, and you mentioned confidence. And so how did you develop your confidence to make such bold moves, from 19 to 22? How did it start building that you became this courageous badass?
I think it was failing. I think it was making enough mistakes through that time, but because of your class, I was able to recognize I did this wrong, but I can do it better next time, and not taking it to heart as much as I would have pre-age 19. And again, some of this is growing up, right? But I do think there are some people that maybe didn't get to have this experience when they were younger that still have the capacity to have it now. But it's being able to fail with grace, that if something goes wrong, it is absolutely about the learning. And then I think to be able to reflect that it was not the end of the world, right? A line that we used in the class was, it's important to be able to tell the difference between disappointment and disaster. And very few things in life are disasters, and the things that are disasters are not things that you can plan for. So some of it, I think, is gaining perspective. I think COVID probably helped with that in some way, right? When things got really, really shaken up, and maybe I was failing in ways I hadn't expected, or losing opportunities I didn't think I was going to lose that were totally outside of my realm of control. It was disappointing, but here we are 5 years later. It wasn't a disaster. It wasn't the end of my world or any world.
It's been 5 years?
5 years.
Wow. Wow. Oh, so let's go to your nonprofit. And you said something very fascinating is that the fear equals learning. And can I describe that, like, love is pulls you forward, fear pushes you on your back. And kind of your aha moment was when you had to vocalize that fear was driving you to be the 4.0 student that you were. And then intrinsically, the love pulls you forward, and it was kind of like a game changer for you, which led you to this decision to work full throttle in the nonprofit. Speak to the vision and mission and how you got involved with it as a student, because I also have this new thesis too, that extracurricular activities is far more important than the curriculum in the classroom. And higher ed has to really start getting behind the fact that the extracurricular activities like you were involved with is the game changer. It was for me joining as a leader in a fraternity back in the 70s. Now it's a different model. Talk a little bit about that on a couple fronts. From higher education, you getting involved with this nonprofit, that it's been a life-changing experience for you. What lured you into that first club meeting, or were you the founder of the club, and to the point where you're full throttle now, all in?
I think it's one of those funny things that you do end up where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there, whether you know it or not. And we can speak more to that in a minute. My freshman year of college, I was involved just with the women's group on campus, and we went to a Days for Girls chapter in Eagleville, Pennsylvania, just for a one-off Saturday volunteering. And I mentioned at Days for Girls, our vision is to create a world where periods are never a problem. We do that by providing access to menstrual products, menstrual health education, and cultivating social enterprises and volunteers. So in that context, I was going to help sew washable pads for a day because I liked to sew, and I thought it would be a fun afternoon.
Okay.
But I had never, ever heard of the problem of period poverty up until this point, right? I grew up in the United States. I had never at that point traveled somewhere where I could imagine people couldn't afford or access menstrual products when they need them. Of course, I know a lot more about that topic now, but at the time it was totally unfathomable to me that there were people in the world that couldn't go to school or work because they didn't have access to menstrual products. So I went for this one afternoon to sew because I liked to sew. And then the volunteers at the Eagleville chapter said, you guys could start a club for this at Penn State. And the 6 of us that were there that day thought, we should start a club for this at Penn State. So we fundraised, we got the sewing equipment that we needed. But I want to be clear, at that point, you never would have caught me saying the word menstruation when I talked about our mission, because we always said we were fundraising and working to support women's education. That was how we talked about it, because we were functionally an arts and crafts club at that point, right? People came, we sewed our components, we went back home. We didn't really talk about the core of the mission. It wasn't until COVID, when we couldn't sew in person, that we as an executive board had to take a step back and say, what can we do to advance this mission when we can't meet in person and make the pads? And that kind of became the turning point where we introduced this advocacy component. We introduced talking about menstruation and giving menstrual health education on campus and focusing on what product access looks like at Penn State and in the state college community. But I don't think that would have happened if we could have just kept coming and doing our little arts and crafts every week. So I did that all 4 years in undergrad. I think I mentioned I ended up doing my thesis on a topic related to menstrual health and data science. And when I came on full time, I think that was my first realization that I can use the skills I learned in college for a mission that speaks to me a little bit more deeply than big oil, right? And at this point, I would be hard pressed to pivot my career away from menstrual health. It might pivot away from specifically the nonprofit I'm at or the nonprofit world in general, maybe to something else. But I'm so deep in this field, and now I've seen so much of the nuance and bigger societal implications that it has. I think it was really just stumbling across the right mission at the right time that resonated with me.
And you mentioned that the club, you never used the word menstruation in the club charter or when you talked about it here at Penn State?
Maybe in the formal documentation or here and there, but if we were fundraising, we were not fundraising to sew washable pads. We were fundraising for women's education. That's how we framed it, because at that time, that's what we thought would be better received by the community.
Because people don't like to talk about menstruation?
Deeply rooted stigma associated with menstruation all over the world, in the US, internationally.
Now, I can say it because of you. You taught me the word.
That's good. That's advocacy in practice.
Well, even my buddies who have daughters, when I mention that I know you and you're in charge of this Days for Girls or whatever, they go to, what is that? Why is there such a stigma about using even the word menstruation? I mean, why is it as historically just a no-no? Because you're a subject matter expert on it. So educate the audience why this word just goes, ee.
I don't know if I'm a subject matter expert. I think there's a lot of deeply rooted sociological issues we can't get into today related to the way that society has historically interacted with women and women's bodily functions and generally functions associated with reproduction. So maybe we can put a pin in that for another hour some other time. But I think the biggest challenge with working in advocacy for menstruation has not been that people are not receptive to it. It has been that they have never been asked to talk or think about it other than in the context of their own personal world. So, for example, in my role, we do a lot of work with infrastructural systems, with workplaces, with universities, with entities to make sure they're creating bathrooms that are conducive to menstruation, that have products that have appropriate wash facilities internationally, things like that. And very rarely do we get anyone, male or female, saying, no, this isn't important. What we get more often is, I had never thought about it. Nobody had ever brought this up. And so I think that's what becomes important with my role in advocacy or our work at Days for Girls is the first step is to get people even comfortable to say it, right? To think about it when they're doing their planning for what the bathroom needs to look like, to think about it in the context of how people are going to school and workplaces and faith centers and all of those other things we do in our daily lives, because this is happening all of the time, right? I wish I had the exact number off the top of my head, but I know there are over 2 billion women and girls of reproductive age in the world right now that are experiencing this process every month. The world needs to respond to this thing that is happening to 2 billion people, but that can only happen if we're talking about it enough that our planners and the people making decisions are also thinking about it.
So, in entrepreneurship, we teach if you're going to start a business, you have to be in absolute love with solving a problem. So you would say you're in absolute love of solving this problem.
I am, because I believe it is a solvable problem within my lifetime.
And you've been at it how long now? From the time you started the group here at Penn State?
I was a volunteer for 4 years, and I've been working there full time for about 3.5.
So you're still in love?
Still in love.
You're not apathetic. You're not stagnating. You're not withholding best efforts from your job. You're being pulled forward by love.
Yes.
Well, and since you talked about the stigma of the name, menstruation, everybody goes, I have, and because of our class and teaching together, as you know, been advancing this fascination with fear versus love, fear versus heart. In fact, I've been advised, stop using the word love, use heart instead, because love is kind of a funny word. People recoil against it, especially men. I've been told, and they're saying, no, it's not love, it's respect or something. And, a football player told me that, saying, don't use love. And yeah, we didn't love each other on that team. We respected each other. So compare and contrast, using the word menstruation is your expertise at this point on North Star, helping people find their North Star, figuring stuff out. And you're a great teacher, by the way. The students loved you. You got such good marks as far as the responses from students on how well you taught and managed that class. What advice would you give to our listeners on this love versus fear, finding something you're in love with? Don't be a starving artist, though. There's this purpose, passion debate. What advice would you give? It's called Clarity Compass, as I'm trying to put this out there for people to help them. What would you advise in your own life, teaching students, love versus fear, North Star? A lot of it is kind of BS-y type of stuff, cliche things, but you seem to be a living example of deeply rooted into kind of some of these mindset theses?
I think I'll go with one of my favorite pieces of advice to give to my student volunteers with Days for Girls. I work a lot with our student programs. And that is, don't follow your passion, follow your curiosities. Especially if you are really in the weeds on something, like if it's your major and you're doing all your classes on this topic, or you've been in this career for 20, 30 years and you're all in on this one thing, it's really easy to feel like you have to be passionate about this thing that you think you've committed all this time and energy to. The reality is you are not going to wake up one day and feel passionate about something. Rather than trying to figure out what that one thing is and choosing it and running with it forever and hoping you'll fall in love with it, one of my favorite pieces of advice is to follow the things that you're curious about. So maybe as a student, that's going to a lecture that's not in your field but kind of sounds interesting, or popping into a random service day that you don't know anything about the topic but you like to sew. So it's kind of when you hear something, not that you're like, oh, I love that thing, I want to dedicate my life to this mission, but you hear something and you're like, wow, I think I'd like to learn more about that. I believe that if you continuously follow those things, that is how you develop a passion. You're not going to wake up and have it. Working at that same career for 20 years is not going to give it to you. But if you're continuously willing to learn and ask questions about a topic, that is passion in its own way.
Have you thought of being a teacher?
I've thought.
And you're curious. So
I'm curious about it.
You're curious, and you certainly have done it and highly credentialed at it. 5-10 years down the road, do you see yourself possibly being an educator and helping people find their way?
I see it as a possibility, yes. And I think I would really enjoy it, just from the time that we spent teaching together.
There you go. So 5 years from now, where do you think you'll be?
That is the $1,000,000 question. I can tell you one story about my last trip to Chile and kind of the closest thing I feel I have to a direction at the moment, or a North Star, perhaps. So my mom is from Chile originally. She was born there under the Pinochet regime in the 70s. And my mom is one of 7 siblings. At the time that she was growing up there, the country was super impoverished. It was under a dictator. There were a lot of political and social things going on that made it a very difficult place to live, especially in a rural community where she was.
And what years are we talking about? Was this in the 50s?
No, my mom was born in 1970. So the event I'm talking about would have been about 1977. In 1977, my mom and her 2 younger siblings, so 3 of the 7, were taken to a care home. So their mother left them on a park bench in the park, said, wait here for me, to my mom, who was the oldest of the 3, said, it's your job to keep you all together, and she didn't come back. They stayed there all night, and the next day a social worker came and offered to take them to get ice cream, and my mom said, we can't, we have to wait for our mom. Ultimately, they went with the social worker, and they went to live in this care home in this town in Chile where they were living. So my mom would have been 7 years old at this point. When she was 9, she was adopted to the United States. She spoke 0 English, right? She came and lived with my grandparents here. But because she spoke 0 English, she was adopted alone. And it wasn't until several months later when my grandparents had her meeting with a translator, a doctor who spoke Spanish, that she was asking, when are my brother and sister coming? But my grandparents had not known she'd been in this facility with 2 other people. To their credit, they tried to go and get them, but they'd already been adopted to Italy. And again, this was the 70s, right? There wasn't this whole deep internet trail of, we can see these things that happened. It's a little bit of a sad story, right? I mean, this was something I grew up hearing all the time, is my mom was very much, I think she carried a lot of guilt that she hadn't kept them together, even though it was completely not her fault, right? She was a child. She wasn't able to communicate her needs at the time with my grandparents. My grandparents had no idea. Now that we have more context, we can see the choices that were made by the individuals running the facility to keep them separate. At that time in Chile, there were a lot of what they call irregular adoptions. I use the term illegal adoptions. Some scholars call it child trafficking, because in some cases that's what it was. There were a lot of adoptions happening transnationally that should probably not have happened. I'm not saying this was one of them, but it was a time when there weren't records being kept of the things that were being done. So this was 50 years ago, right? In the 90s, my mom went with my adoptive grandparents back to Chile looking for family, looking for her other siblings who still presumably lived there. We didn't know at the time, or her biological parents. Didn't find anybody. And the gentleman who ran the orphanage, who's kind of a gray character in my mind, right? Because we know all of these things were happening under the dictatorship, and he was kind of circumventing some of the processes, but also it was a terrible time to live in the country. He was doing what I'm sure he felt was the right thing to do to get kids out of difficult or dangerous or abusive situations. But when my mom went looking for family, he said, why? He said, these people have nothing to offer you. They're going to be bitter that you got out and they didn't. They're going to ask you for things because they believe that you're more resourced than they are because you had these privileges. he was not positive about what that experience would look like. And so my mom left Chile at that point. They were only there for like a short period of time after she graduated and came back to the US. And then this year in June, my mother, my sister, and I went to Chile. It was my first time there. For Christmas, I got us all tickets because I thought it would be a fun family trip to go see where mom grew up and kind of see that part of my heritage, because I didn't grow up with that influence at all. My mom speaks zero Spanish now. She lost it all when she came to the US. I speak more than she does at this point. So we went down to Chile. My mom was super on edge. I mean, she's not a very high-strung person, and I have never, ever seen her so anxious as when we were going back there, because I think she carries a lot of the memories of the time of what the country was like. We went to Chile. As much as I adore my mother, she is not a planner. The one thing she was supposed to plan was the day that we were going to go to her hometown and see the children's home and see these other places. Nothing planned. The children's home is not there anymore. Now it's just a school. But we were going to go back to the building and see. So in the process of me trying to find the address for this orphanage that doesn't exist anymore, I found a Facebook group that was children of Quinta de Tococo, or this town that she lived in. And, my whole life I grew up knowing the names of these siblings that she'd been adopted separately from. And my grandmother, who was just so incredibly caring at the time, when my mom was really young, and she still had all these memories of leaving Chile, my grandmother wrote down every detail, all the names, the ages, everything she could remember, so my mom could have it. Now we have literal photocopies of my grandmother's handwriting of like these people's names and my mom's memories. And so I knew somewhere I had an aunt and uncle in Italy with these first names that we knew. And I'm like, let me just check. There's only like 50 people in this group. Let me just see. And in this list, there's a woman with the same first name who lives in Milan. And I'm like, okay, this is not a guaranteed thing, right? This is such a shot in the dark. But what are the odds there'd be another person with the same first name who lives in Italy from this tiny, tiny town in Chile that went through this orphanage? So later that day, I was like, Mom, I don't know, but I think you should message them, because my mom has never stopped looking for these people, right? We've gone as far as putting ads in the newspaper in Italy and, getting all these moving pieces as much as you reasonably could, I think. And it was just stumbling across this group that we found this person, and it was the right person. It was my aunt. And she had previously, not previously like 10 years ago. I think that's important to contextualize. Like, I think less than a year ago, she hired a PI to find the family in Chile. So she had already found 3 of the siblings still in Chile. And so we're in Chile when this is all happening. And my aunt is like, oh yeah, I know where they are. I found them this year. You can go meet them in person. They all live within driving distance of Santiago. So totally unplanned, right place, right time situation. Our last day in Chile, we were able to meet these 3 siblings that were still there, that she hadn't seen in 50 years.
Oh my goodness.
And this has completely changed like my life perspective on right place, right time, because any time I could have theoretically found that Facebook group, or my mom could have, but to find it while we were there, to have the opportunity to go and meet them in person, I'm going to cry because you're crying.
So go ahead.
No, it's okay. But to go and meet them in person, I mean, it was just.
So park bench, 9-year-old, 7-year-old, and what was the third?
My mom was 7 and the 2 siblings would have been maybe 4 or 5 or 5.
They all
6.
came together. They all got together again?
So we met the 3 in Chile, and then just not even a month ago, we went to Italy to meet the 2 that she was adopted separately from. So she has seen all of her siblings this year for the first time since about 1977.
And are they constantly in touch now, or like, what's it like?
Big language barrier is the most difficult thing. So my aunt in Italy does not speak any English. She only speaks Italian. I have 2 aunts and an uncle in Chile that we've reconnected with, all Spanish. One aunt speaks a little bit of English, so we do that together, but for the most part, I translate the Spanish for my mom, who doesn't speak any Spanish. And I have one uncle that speaks Italian, Spanish, and English, who is the translator for all of their video calls.
And so scientists could study what the similarities, the differences, the socialization from being in different countries, different parenting styles. Have you seen any conclusions to, like, beyond just the humanity coming together again? But I mean, just from a observation, what have you said? What does this mean to you? You were kind of saying this has given you a new perspective.
It's given me a perspective on everything in its own time, right? Because my mom's been looking for these people for 45, almost 50 years, but it happened to work out in a case where we had the resources and the ability to be there in Chile to meet the ones there, and to go to Italy and to meet the ones there. And I think at any other point in time, I mean, literally at any other point in time, that would not have happened. Even if she'd found the Chilean family in the 90s, the internet didn't exist. They didn't know that the ones in Italy existed. Even the ones in Chile didn't all know each other until about 5 years ago, because again, they'd been adopted separately within the country. So the timing just had to work out in such a way that everyone was where they needed to be in life, that we could physically get there and be together. We're hoping there will be a day in which all of them can be together. There's one uncle we haven't found yet that we think is still in Chile, but no one is sure of his whereabouts just yet. But it just had to happen that way. And I think that kind of thing happening gives you a lot of perspective on trusting yourself to be where you need to be, trusting the universe or a deity or whatever you want to call it to guide you in a direction that you're meant to be in. Because Chile was not really on my radar as oh yeah, I want to go live in Chile, right? But now I already went back again in September. I'm going back again in about 3 weeks, just because to go and be with my family and be with my cousins and meet these people that were previously not a part of my life at all. But now I feel this calling to go back. Whereas a year ago, you and I were talking, I was like, Greg, I don't know if I should get an apartment. I don't know where to travel. I had all this analysis paralysis. And now it's like, okay, like I don't know exactly where I'm supposed to be or what I'm doing next, but I'm enjoying spending time in Chile, and I'm just going to keep spending time in Chile because it feels like where I'm supposed to be right now.
So many questions, but I know we're running out of time. You're going to be spending Thanksgiving there?
I will.
And
They don't really care about Thanksgiving so much.
well, I know, but you do and we do, and so it's kind of cool that you're going to have Thanksgiving and you're 50%, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's your heritage. It's who you are, Jess. That's amazing. Does your mom want to go? Or, what is she doing now that she's back with her siblings?
I've asked her about that because I was curious as to how can you imagine how that changes your life? I just can't imagine
Questions.
the weight off of all, because her thing was always hoping that they were safe and loved and cared for. And so I think for her to see everybody's okay was like the biggest weight off her shoulders ever of her entire life. Because as a 7-year-old, she felt that she failed her siblings. And so to then come back as an almost 57-year-old and see that everyone turned out okay. They have their own kids, their own families.
And they live in Italy,
lives.
which is the great. They have good lives in Italy?
The two that were adopted to Italy, yes. And the ones in Chile also, just in a different way. And so your point to kind of socialization and what that looks like, it's really, really interesting. And I think it's made me reflect a lot on how different my life could have been, right? And my mom, I'm sure, the same way, where she's wondered if she would have made it if she'd stayed in Chile during that time. But I think to see her family, and that even for all of the different trials and tribulations they went through while they were staying in the country, they were there for the fall of the dictatorship, they were there for all of these experiences, to still come together as siblings, even not even speaking the same language, and to see that bond not being broken. I mean, that's so cool.
Well, we talked about community and sense of place and, traveling the world nomadically, and here what's pulling you back to Chile, if I pronounce that right, is family, is love, and listening to the universe. It's again, as you navigate your next weeks, years, life, what would you? Again, I'm always trying to synthesize thing into a stick it to fear type of thing. How do you sum it all up based on everything you've just experienced, even in this amazing story?
I think I sum it all up as, for me, the beauty of digital nomadism and this choice I made to stick it to fear is not about visiting as many countries as possible. It's not about even what you called adventure seeking. It is about the ultimate flexibility to go to the places where I feel called to, whether that's choosing a nonprofit and not a big oil company, whether that's staying in Raleigh or choosing to travel, whether that's traveling quickly or slowly. The flexibility is sticking it to fear. The flexibility is where the problem solving comes into play. That I wasn't going to go back to Chile in September. I was going to live in Istanbul and have a great time, but I felt I wasn't done in Chile, and I could change the plans because I've created a life that offers me that privilege.
And so, calling the podcast Clarity Compass, it's kind of tied into a GPS system and stuff, So your operating system, your GPS system, is one of what? Again, I'm looking always for the definition. Flexibility certainly, but you're open to listening to the universe and follow your curiosity and your calling. You say things so eloquently. How can you bumper sticker that?
I think my GPS is, as much as possible, to trust the things that feel good, even if it's not a rational decision. And that was the biggest thing I had to learn from your class and being your learning assistant and working through the curriculum, was as a data scientist, as a super analytical person, I was drawn to making the most logical, often fear-based decision for my future. And since I've internalized the curriculum and connected with it more, now I feel much more comfortable saying, does it make financial or logistical or planning in any kind of form sense to go back to Chile a third time in 6 months? Probably not. But it's where I feel I want to be. And in that fear versus love, the first piece of creating a life that is built around love is not just confidence in your ability to do things, but to trust yourself that what you are choosing is maybe not right, but is right for you in that moment with the knowledge that you have.
A lot of students ask, what is purpose versus pleasure? So how would you define, some people could be listening and say, oh, you're just, some pleasure seeker, but it sounds more purposeful. Can you help us determine the difference?
I think two things can be true. Those are not necessarily mutually exclusive. I'm not to throw another bumper sticker at you, but this is my personal mantra that I've kept. I think I put it on my personal branding sheet in your class, actually. And that is, service to others is the rent you pay for your room on earth. But mentally, for me personally, I add an addendum to that. So for me, it's service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. Pay your rent, but cherish the room.
Wow. Okay.
I like that phrase. I think it's a reminder that with your skills and your privilege and the other things that have come to you in life, I feel you have some responsibility to the people around you to do the best that you can for them and for this world that we're cohabiting. But at the same time, it's important to remember you only get one life. Seeking pleasure or seeking connection or whatever you want to call that is still absolutely a part of making the most of your life. And you can do both things.
Well, a book I read said the 4 things we have to value in life that we have to figure out and align are how we spend our time, acquiring money to be able to spend your time, and then the relationships you have, and then your purpose. Those are like the 4 legs of the chair in a sense, and so would you say that you have found a way to align all 4?
I don't think I am perfectly in alignment, but I think I am much closer than I would have been if I had not made some of the choices we talked about in today's podcast.
Great. Well, I anything else you want to sum up that we only had so much time and we could go on for hours. What else would you like kind of in the theme of this Clarity Compass? What else would you want to, finish up with?
I would finish up with maybe the challenge you and I have talked about in our classes in other contexts, which is how to get to this point without needing a big life-changing event, whether negative or positive, right? Whether having a heart attack or whether finding family in Chile, good things and bad things happen throughout life. How can we get to these realizations without a big life-changing thing needing to happen? I don't have the answer to that, but I think if we crack the code, that's the special sauce to getting this fear versus love debate into everybody's mind, is if we can start leading with love and sticking it to fear before fear or love has really shown itself to us. I think being able to internalize that in your day-to-day life is the hardest part.
Well, one follow-up question to that. We did an experiment on doing an adult version of our class, and we had people, of all ages, from young 24-year-olds to, people in their 60s. And that was quite fascinating of a laboratory. And to build upon that point about what we learned in that class, dealing it with adults, anything you want to speak to that on that goal of helping people get there before there has to be a sudden cardiac arrest, or some abject failure that you have to come back and you're always in this comeback mode and things change. I guess what you're saying is how can we help people get here without a catastrophic event that makes them wake up?
I think that's the $1 million question. I don't think you or I have the answer to that. I think one thing we did learn from that class is there's a healthy balance of fear versus love. As much as we say stick it to fear, gotta have a little bit of fear, right? Especially if you're traveling full time, there's a healthy amount of anxiety you need to carry with you no matter what it is that you're doing. I think the difference is making sure that decisions about your direction in life are led by love and not fear. I think that's the difference maker.
Wow. I want to end on that note. Jess, it's been amazing. Thank you for sharing so much with our audience.
Of course. Thank you for having me and for us riffing with microphones for once instead of just in your office.
It's been fun. Well, this is Clarity Compass, and I'm Greg Woodman, and I want to thank Jess for being our guest today, and I hope you enjoyed our podcast today. Thank you very much.